I hadn't eaten a full meal in days. The hollowness in my stomach had become a constant companion, a dull ache that reminded me of how little I had left to give myself. And yet, when I looked across the street and saw him, barefoot, ribs sharp through a torn shirt, his body slouched against the wall like a forgotten shadow, I felt something stronger than hunger rise in me, something that pushed me forward until my trembling hands carried my very last plate of rice toward him. For days I had stretched scraps, boiling water with a few grains to fool my stomach, convincing myself tomorrow might bring something better. But the cupboards were bare, the fridge a hollow box, and the only food left in my world was a plate of plain rice. I had promised myself I would save it for the morning, mix it with water, make it last. Yet when I saw him across the street that night, all my promises faltered. He had lingered on that street before, but always like a shadow, someone you could pretend not to notice. Tonight was different. The lamp above him flickered weakly, casting light over his wasted body. His ribs cut against his torn shirt, his skin clung to bone, and his lips looked cracked, almost blue. His hair hung over his face in tangled strands. He looked like more than a starving man. He looked like abandonment itself. I tried not to stare. I sat back down, lifted the spoon, and told myself I needed the rice more. My body ached, my hunger was sharp, and I had given away more than I could spare in the past. But every time I brought the spoon close, his image pressed into my chest, as if my heart refused to let me eat in peace. Shame burned hotter than hunger. At last, I rose. My hands shook as I warmed the rice, steam rising like whispers in the dark. The chipped plate held it, cracks along its edges like veins that carried my memories of too many small, meager meals. I stepped outside, the night air biting through my thin sweater, the world strangely hushed except for the buzzing of the lamp and a distant car. Each step battled between two voices. Keep it. You need it. Give it. He needs it more. When I reached him, he didn't move. His head was bowed, his body slumped so still that fear struck me. I thought I might be too late. Kneeling, I set the plate before him. My breath caught. Slowly, as if dragging himself back from another world, he lifted his head. His eyes found the rice and widened, filled not with disbelief, but with something deeper, as if he was staring at life itself. Without a word, he reached out. His hand trembled as he took the first bite, chewing slowly, cautiously, like someone rediscovering what it meant to eat. Grain by grain, life seemed to seep back into him. I should have felt the gnaw of hunger scream inside me, but instead a warmth spread through my chest, filling hollows I hadn't known could be filled. And then I noticed it. Others were watching. A woman with grocery bags had paused, her steps frozen. Children who had been running stood still, their laughter cut short. A shopkeeper leaned against his doorway, his eyes softened. Even the stray dog lay down on the pavement, quiet and attentive. The whole street had slowed into silence, as if some invisible hand had commanded stillness. When he finished, he set the empty plate back between us. His fingers lingered on the rim, his gaze locking onto mine. There was no thank you, no smile, no words at all. Instead, his eyes burned with recognition, steady and piercing, as though he had known this moment would come. My chest tightened under that gaze. I felt as if the world had shifted. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he pressed his palms to the ground and began to rise. I expected him to stumble, to collapse under weakness. Instead, he straightened, rolling his shoulders, lifting his head, and standing taller than I had thought possible. The frail man I had fed was gone. In his place stood a figure of strength, his presence commanding, his shadow long beneath the flickering streetlight. The silence deepened. The woman clutched her bags tighter. The children drew closer together. The shopkeeper stepped back into his doorway. Even the stray dog lowered its head. Every eye turned to him, held by something unseen, as though the world itself had paused to witness. I clutched the empty plate to my chest, my knuckles white, my heart thundering. I could not look away. He was no longer just a man who had been starving. He was something else entirely, something greater, as though the rags had only hidden a truth too heavy for me to understand. And then he stood, shoulders squared, eyes steady, taller than I had ever imagined, and the entire street fell into a silence so deep it felt alive. Every pair of eyes was on him, every breath held, every sound swallowed by the weight of his presence. I clutched the empty plate to my chest, unable to move, unable to speak, as the question burned inside me. Who exactly had I just fed, and why did it feel as though the world itself had shifted when he rose? He wasn't just standing, he was commanding. The very air seemed to bend around him, thickening with a gravity that made people hesitate to breathe. A man who had been nothing more than a shadow in rags was now the center of the world, and though no one knew his name, every soul on that street felt the same undeniable truth. Something had shifted, and he held it in his palm. The silence that followed was so complete, it pressed against my chest. Mothers hushed their children, shopkeepers leaned forward without realizing, and those rushing home slowed their steps as if caught by invisible chains. He had said nothing, yet his presence filled every corner of that narrow street. I was still kneeling, the chipped plate pressed against my palms, staring at him like a child staring at the moon. His gaze traveled over the crowd with deliberate calm, unashamed, steady, carrying the weight of someone who had been seen before, in greater places. When his eyes returned to me, my chest locked tight. He bent slightly, not hurriedly, but with measured grace, and lifted the plate from my hands. For a moment I thought he would return it without a word. Instead, he held it between us, his voice so soft it seemed to belong only to me. "Thank you, Guardian." The word hit me like a hammer. Guardian. It didn't sound like flattery. It sounded like recognition, a title I had never earned. My knees weakened, not from hunger, but from the tremor of something larger than myself. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words died in my throat. Already he had turned, his shoulders square, his steps steady, as though this broken street had always been his stage. The hush grew deeper with each movement, every step like the toll of a bell. People parted instinctively. Mothers clutched children close, shopkeepers leaned back. The stray dog lifted its head in quiet reverence. No one dared to block his way. Then, from the far end of the road, headlights appeared, sharp beams slicing the night. A sleek black SUV rolled into view, its polished surface gleaming even in the weak orange light. The hum of its engine was low, precise, the kind that spoke of wealth and authority. The vehicle stopped smoothly at the curb. The crowd shrank back further, fear and awe mingling. The back door opened, not by him, but by another. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, gloves gleaming faintly, his movements crisp and ritual-like. He bowed, then extended his hand. The man I had fed only moments ago moved forward with quiet authority. His rags seemed different now, no longer shameful but like a discarded disguise. He nodded at the suited man, a gesture not of gratitude, but of command. And then he bent, not like a beggar, but like a sovereign accepting loyalty. The suited man bowed deeper and guided him into the car. The crowd buzzed with whispers, questions surging but unspoken. Who was he? Why here? Why now? Their fear and wonder wrapped around me, and I felt the heat of it pressing against my ribs. I couldn't move. My body refused. All I could do was clutch the plate tighter, my eyes locked on the door of that SUV. He brushed his hand against the frame before stepping in, and even that small gesture seemed final, like a curtain closing on a play whose first act I had just stumbled into. Then, at the last moment, he turned. Our eyes met. His gaze was steady, filled with something I couldn't name but could feel in my bones. something between a promise and a warning. The door closed with a muted thud. The SUV pulled away, its taillights glowing red as it vanished into the dark. And yet even after it was gone, I still felt him watching me, his voice echoing in my chest. "Thank you, Guardian." I stood frozen in the middle of that silent street, the empty plate clutched to my chest, the hush around me broken only by the fading hum of the SUV's engine. He had looked back, locked his gaze with mine. And in that single glance, he had left me with a truth I couldn't escape. This was not over. Whatever he carried, wherever he came from, it had tied itself to me. And though I didn't yet understand why, I knew with every beat of my trembling heart that my life had just been claimed by a story far larger than my own. He left in a car that didn't belong in our neighborhood, its sleek surface reflecting a life far removed from cracked pavements and broken streetlights. And yet the silence he left behind stayed in my chest all night, pressing like a stone I could neither spit out nor swallow. It was the kind of silence that doesn't fade when the engines go. It lingers, echoing inside you until it becomes part of your own heartbeat. Long after the black SUV disappeared beyond the bend, the street refused to return to normal. Clusters of neighbors lingered under buzzing lamps, voices hushed but restless. Mothers traded uneasy glances, children tugged at sleeves with unanswered questions, and men who usually argued about bills now whispered as if the night had turned holy. Their eyes often flicked toward me. Everyone knew the plate had been mine, the rice had been mine, the act had been mine. Though no one spoke it aloud, I felt their thoughts pressing heavy against my back. What had she given, and what had she received? I clutched the plate tighter, its chipped edge cold, the last warmth long gone. My steps quickened toward my apartment, heart pounding as though the silence itself followed me. Inside, my dim room smelled faintly of rice. I set the plate down on the wooden table that had carried every desperate meal of the last year. To me it was only a dish, chipped and tired. But tonight, it felt like a relic. That was when I saw it. Beneath the plate lay a folded cloth napkin, so fine it didn't belong in my home. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. The fabric was smooth, stitched with golden threads that shimmered even in the weak light. At its center glowed an embroidered symbol, 2 interlocked circles surrounded by rays. It seemed alive, pulsing with a meaning I couldn't grasp. My chest tightened. Had he placed it there before taking the plate? Why leave it behind? Why me? I tried to dismiss it, but when I closed my eyes, the napkin burned behind my eyelids. That night, my dreams carried me far from cracked sidewalks. I walked through palaces lined with the same golden circles, floors carpeted with rugs softer than any I had known. Food overflowed from bowls and platters, rivers of rice spilling endlessly. Voices rose in chants I couldn't understand, yet somehow I knew they called to me. At the far end of a great chamber sat the man, not ragged, not silent, but on a throne, his hand extended toward me. I woke gasping, sweat dampening my chest. For a moment, I thought the pounding in my ears was my own heartbeat. Then I heard it again, 3 sharp knocks at my door. Fear froze me. Who knocks at dawn in a place like mine? My hand hovered near the lock until a voice spoke, steady and formal. By his order. Open, please. I swallowed and turned the knob. In the corridor stood a man in a crisp uniform, posture straight, gloved hands holding something against his chest. His expression carried no hostility, only discipline. Yet his presence radiated authority that felt foreign in my crumbling building. Without hesitation, he bowed his head slightly and extended a sealed envelope. He asked me to deliver this personally, he said, his voice reverent, as if this letter was not paper, but a sacred trust. My fingers shook as I accepted it. The envelope was thick, embossed with the same golden symbol, its edges sealed in wax, stamped with a gleaming crest. "What is this?" I whispered, my throat dry. "You'll know soon," he replied. His eyes did not meet mine. They seemed to look beyond me, as though my apartment, my life, were already too small for what I held. Then he bowed again, turned sharply, and walked away, his footsteps echoing until silence swallowed them. I stood frozen, the envelope heavy in my hands, the seal pressing into my palm like a brand. For a long time, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My life had been measured in scraps, in survival, in hunger, and now I held something that felt like destiny. At last, my eyes dropped to the front of the envelope. In bold, deliberate script, it read, "You are cordially invited to the Hall of Thanks. Come prepared to receive what is yours." My breath caught, my pulse roaring in my ears. What could possibly be mine when I had nothing? Why me? The envelope trembled in my hands, and though I wanted to throw it aside, some force deeper than reason told me I could not run. Not now. Not ever. I had never stepped foot in a place with chandeliers, guards, or crystal glasses. My world had been cracked pavements, second-hand shops, and meals stretched from scraps. But the man who once sat in rags, who had eaten from my chipped plate, had summoned me there. And as I clutched the letter in my trembling hands, I realized that hunger had led me to a table I could never have imagined. The bus ride felt unreal, like drifting between two worlds. I sat rigid, the envelope pressed so tightly in my grip that the wax seal left an imprint against my skin. Around me, passengers shifted, carried shopping bags, scolded children, but I saw none of them. My eyes stayed fixed on the blurred windows, where streets grew wider, cleaner, brighter, as if the city itself was preparing me for something I didn't deserve. When the bus jolted to a final stop, I stepped out into a world far from mine. Before me stretched an estate so vast it swallowed the horizon. Wrought iron gates twisted into intricate designs gleamed in the sunlight. Beyond them, manicured gardens spread out, fountains soared high, and a driveway wound endlessly toward a mansion too perfect to be real. For a moment, I stood frozen, clutching the envelope as though it might vanish and prove the whole thing a cruel trick. Then the gates began to swing open silently, smoothly, as though they had been waiting only for me. A guard in immaculate uniform stepped forward. He extended his hand and said my name, his tone formal yet unsettling, as if he had known me long before I ever set foot there. My heart thudded as I walked through, his nod sealing an unspoken acceptance. Staff lined the path, bowing slightly as I passed. Not one asked who I was. Not one questioned the patched coat and scuffed shoes I wore. They seemed to expect me, as though my place here had been written long ago. At the grand doorway, a woman in a silk gown took my arm with surprising gentleness. "We've prepared something for you," she said. I wanted to protest. I didn't belong here. I hadn't earned this, but my voice failed. She led me to a chamber where clothes lay waiting, garments finer than anything I had ever touched, fabric soft as clouds, embroidery so delicate it shimmered under light. When I dressed and looked into the tall mirror, I hardly recognized myself. Gone was the woman shaped by hunger and survival. In her place stood someone who looked like she belonged beneath chandeliers, someone who looked chosen. They guided me through marble halls that seemed endless, ceilings arched like cathedrals, portraits of stern ancestors lining the walls. Every step echoed too loudly, reminding me I was a guest in a world not my own. At last, they opened tall doors, and I entered a dining room unlike any I had known. The table stretched on, white linen draped across it, crystal glasses gleaming, silver cutlery catching the morning sun. Food filled the center, roasted meats, steaming rice, bread still warm enough to release wisps of steam, enough to feed my entire street 10 times over. Yet none of it mattered the moment he entered. The man who had once sat in rags walked in transformed. His hair was trimmed, his posture regal, his clothes sharp. The hunger that once hollowed his eyes was gone, replaced by a steady calm, and authority that made even the air feel different. Yet when his gaze found me, there was still a softness there, the same eyes that had once accepted my rice. He smiled faintly and gestured to the seat nearest him. "This table is for you," he said, his voice carrying with ease. "Because of what you gave." My throat tightened as I sat. Servants moved around us with quiet precision, filling glasses, setting food, but all I could focus on was his presence. He ate slowly, speaking between bites, not in riddles, but in truths that cracked the shell of everything I thought I knew. He told me of his lineage, of wealth and power that stretched back generations, of palaces that never knew hunger. Yet, he confessed, those riches had become a prison, and he had chosen to walk among the forgotten, to rediscover what mattered. "When you gave me your last plate of rice," he said, his gaze steady, "you gave me more than food. You gave me proof that kindness survives. Even in the hollow of poverty, his words left me speechless. I gripped my spoon tightly, torn between disbelief and awe. He spoke of burdens I couldn't imagine, of responsibilities he had fled, of a weight too vast for one man alone. And yet, when he looked at me, I felt that somehow, impossibly, he was asking me to share it. As the meal ended, silence settled. He reached into his pocket and drew out a velvet box, placing it before me with deliberate care. "Your chapter begins now," he said. He opened the box, revealing a golden key that gleamed under the chandelier's light. My name was etched onto its surface, carved as if it had always belonged there. The room seemed to contract around me as I stared at the key, its weight pressing on me even from within the box. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, knowing that once I touched it, nothing in my life could ever remain the same. He held my gaze, unwavering, as though daring me to claim it. And deep down, beneath fear and doubt, I knew this was not a gift, it was a summons. He told me I had given more than rice that night. I had given recognition, something far rarer, far more powerful than food itself. In that single act, without even knowing it, I had stepped into a circle older than I could comprehend. My hands trembled around the golden key as he leaned forward and said, "That one act made you part of something ancient." His words rippled through me, heavy and unsettling. I sat across the endless table, chandeliers blazing above, the scent of rich food still lingering, yet none of it mattered. His eyes were fixed on me with a weight that suggested this was not just a conversation. It was a reckoning. He began to speak of a society that lived in shadows, not of wealth or politics, but of unseen kindness. An order built not on thrones or crowns, but on small, selfless acts that multiplied quietly through centuries. "Each of us," he said steadily, "was once helped by a stranger. Not with riches, not with power, but with something pure, something given without thought of return. And so we swore to repay it, not once, not twice, but tenfold, so the circle would never break." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening as he described their members. A teacher who had fed children in secret, a shopkeeper who had given bread on credit and never asked for repayment, a seamstress who clothed orphans without recognition, ordinary people who had chosen kindness when no one was watching. Then his voice dropped lower, and his words struck me harder than any thunder. "Your act," he said, his eyes piercing mine, "fulfilled the final requirement of a prophecy, older than either of us." The breath caught in my throat. A prophecy? The word felt absurd on my tongue. I wasn't chosen, I was hungry. I gave because. My words faltered. Because what? Because pity had moved me? Number. Deep down, I knew I had given because it was the right thing to do, because I couldn't bear to see another human being starve. He leaned closer, his voice softer now. "Do you think the test is wealth or strength? Number." You were not tested. You passed simply by being yourself. The words shook me more than any accusation could have. Had I been carrying this unseen legacy all along, unaware? Was my smallest act of kindness a thread woven into something far greater? He rose from his seat, gesturing for me to follow. My knees trembled as I walked beside him into a study lined with shelves groaning under centuries of books. The air smelled of old paper and polished wood, grounding and timeless. At the center of the room sat a box, iron-bound, its surface carved with markings identical to the golden symbol I had seen before. My hand shook as I slid the key into its lock. It turned smoothly, as though it had been waiting only for me. The lid lifted with a creak, and I froze. Inside lay hundreds of photographs, their faces staring back in black and white. Farmers, soldiers, mothers, children. None were famous, none celebrated. Yet each photo captured a moment of sacrifice. One person handing bread to another, a girl giving away her only apple, a stranger holding a shivering child. Tears blurred my vision as I picked one up, a young girl, no older than 12, pressing fruit into the hands of a crying boy. No audience, no reward, just compassion. And yet, here she was, remembered. He stood beside me, his hands folded behind his back. Every one of these people thought their act was small, forgotten, but here they are immortal. They are the foundation of this order. Proof that goodness needs no witness to matter. My throat tightened as I sifted through more. Faces unknown, stories unwritten, yet each one etched in the stone of history through an act of kindness. They weren't heroes by the world's standards. They were something greater, invisible builders of hope. Then he drew forward the last page. It was blank, pristine, empty, waiting. He placed a pen into my trembling hand, his voice almost reverent. "Now," he said, eyes locked on mine, "write your purpose." The weight of the pen in my hand felt heavier than any hunger I had endured. The empty page seemed to stretch endlessly before me, daring me to define a life I had never thought would matter. My chest tightened as his gaze bore into me, patient but unyielding. And in that stillness, I realized the question was no longer "what have you given?" but "what will you build?" The golden key didn't open a treasure chest or a vault of gold. It opened a door I never expected. Beyond it was no palace, no kingdom of jewels, but something far greater. A building overflowing with food, with volunteers, with quiet honor. And as the door swung wide, I felt the weight of every grain of rice I had ever given transform into something that reached across the world. The car stopped in front of a plain, building that blended so easily into the industrial district that I might have walked past it 100 times without notice. No ornate gates, no chandeliers, no marble steps, just a heavy door that looked like it had been waiting for centuries. He stepped out first, and I followed, the golden key clutched so tightly in my hand that my palm ached. He did not speak, only gestured for me to open the door myself. My fingers trembled as I slid the key into the lock. For a heartbeat, I feared it would refuse me, that this was all a test. But with a soft click, the door yielded. The world that opened before me stole the breath from my lungs. Inside stretched rows of shelves stacked with sacks of rice, barrels of flour, baskets of vegetables fresh with the scent of earth. Volunteers moved quickly and quietly, sorting food, filling baskets, stirring giant pots from which steam rose in comforting waves. Children sat at long wooden tables, their laughter mingling with the sounds of ladles and spoons. This was no warehouse. This was a lifeline. This, he said softly, reverently, is the house of hunger. I walked slowly, my eyes wide, my chest tight. Each corner pulsed with purpose. Every sack, every basket, every table meant someone would eat tonight. It wasn't charity. It was dignity made tangible. He led me further inside, stopping before a vast map pinned to the wall. My breath caught when I saw it. Not just our city, not just our country, the world. Tiny glowing pins marked hundreds of locations, kitchens, shelters, food banks, all connected by invisible threads to this very place. "This is what your rice became," he said, his gaze steady on me. "Not just one meal, but thousands. Not just one act, but a ripple that spread across continents. Each kindness births more kindness. That is the truth of this order." My knees weakened. I thought of that night, the chipped plate, the single portion I had hesitated to give, and now it had multiplied beyond imagination. My hunger had fed millions. As we walked, he pointed to wings of the facility, each engraved with a name. Not kings or politicians, but ordinary people, a farmer, a mother, a teacher, all who had once given something small, unnoticed by the world, and yet honored here as foundations of survival. Tears stung my eyes as he guided me into a new wing under construction. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint. And there, above the entryway, a new plaque gleamed in the light. It bore my name. I staggered back, shaking my head. My name, etched into stone, permanent, undeniable. My act was no longer invisible. "This house grows with every sacrifice," he said gently, resting his hand on my shoulder. "Your name now stands among them. Your giving is no longer a moment. It is a foundation." Volunteers passing by nodded at me, smiling as though they had always known me. Children peeked from the dining hall, their faces curious, and for the first time in my life, I felt not small, not forgotten, but necessary. Yet even as warmth spread through my chest, his expression darkened. His eyes scanned the room, as if measuring whether to speak the truth pressing on his lips. When he turned back to me, his voice carried a weight that froze me. "What is built for good," he said slowly, "is always hunted by those who crave power." His words fell heavy in the air. These kitchens do more than feed bodies. They inspire. And inspiration is dangerous to those who profit from despair. You gave a plate of rice, and now the world is watching. But so are they. I stared at him, the joy of a moment ago already shadowed by dread. The plaque above the doorway gleamed brighter than ever, but in my heart it no longer felt like only an honor. It felt like a target. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, though his words struck like thunder. "They know your name now." My heart pounded, the air suddenly heavy with a dread I couldn't name. The plaque above the doorway gleamed brighter than ever, but now it felt less like an honor and more like a target. My name was no longer just a symbol of kindness. It was a mark that others could use, twist, exploit. His eyes held mine, unflinching, as he said the words that sealed my fate. "They will come for you." Not everyone believes in giving without gain, and not everyone sees kindness as something sacred. Some arrived not with empty stomachs or trembling hands, but with shining shoes, ironed suits, flashing cameras, and carefully prepared words that smelled sweeter than honey, yet carried the sharp sting of poison. They smiled as though the world was theirs already, but I felt deep within my bones that what they carried in their briefcases was not opportunity. It was chains. It began on a morning that should have been ordinary. The House of Hunger was alive with warmth, steam rising from pots, children laughing as they waited for bowls, volunteers moving like a chorus of compassion. I stood by a window, sunlight spilling across the floor, breathing in the scent of fresh bread, when the rumble of engines broke the harmony. Multiple cars pulled up at once, sleek, expensive, their arrival synchronized like soldiers on parade. Doors swung open, and a group stepped out, men and women polished to perfection. Their coats were lined with fur, their watches glittered, their shoes gleamed so brightly they reflected the sun. At their center walked a woman in crimson heels, her stride sharp, bracelets clinking like the sound of coins tossed into an empty bowl. They entered without hesitation. Their smiles were too wide, their words too sweet. Cameras rose, flashing as they documented every corner, every volunteer, every child with a bowl of rice. The woman extended her hand to me, her expression flawless but hollow. "We admire your work," she said smoothly, "and we believe your mission deserves a stage. Imagine your kitchen scaled into a global network. Imagine shipments, branded with your name, televised galas, donors clamoring for the spotlight. With our funding, your vision will not just grow, it will dominate." Her entourage nodded in perfect rhythm, their agreement rehearsed, their approval pre-packaged. They slid a thick contract across the table toward me. Leather-bound, its pages gleamed with promises. Numbers so vast they felt unreal. Guarantees of wealth, security, influence. They spoke as if it wasn't an offer, but an inevitability. Sign, and your troubles are gone. Sign, and hunger itself will bow to you. For a dangerous moment, I faltered. I imagined kitchens across continents, children fed in every village, my name glowing as a symbol of hope instead of suspicion. The pen they pushed toward me gleamed like sunlight, daring me to surrender. Then I felt his eyes. He had been silent, leaning against the far wall, but when I looked at him, his gaze was unshakable, carved in iron. His voice broke the silence, low and steady. "This will cost you everything." The words struck like a stone. Not just wealth, not just time, everything. My freedom, my soul. The purity of that night when I gave my last plate of rice with no thought of reward. If I signed, that moment would be rewritten, not as kindness, but as the first transaction in a business that would never end. My hand trembled, but I closed the book and pushed the pen away. "No," I said. The transformation was instant. Smiles cracked, eyes hardened. The woman snapped the contract shut, her bracelets jangling like chains. The others slammed their briefcases closed with cold finality. They left in silence, but their cameras did not. They lingered, flashing, recording every flicker of hesitation on my face. By nightfall, the storm began. Headlines screamed my name, twisted into lies. Fraud, liar, thief of donations. News anchors dissected my story with dripping disdain. Commentators debated if I had ever truly been poor, if the House of Hunger was a front for corruption. Articles spread faster than fire, convincing even those who had once stood beside me. Vans crowded my street, their lights flooding my windows until night was replaced by interrogation. Reporters camped at my door, microphones stabbing at me with questions disguised as curiosity. Where did the money go? Who paid for the rice? Were you ever truly hungry? The community I had once fed began to doubt. Parents pulled their children away from me. Whispers followed my footsteps. Friends avoided my calls. Alone at my table, staring at the ceiling, I asked myself again and again if perhaps I had made a mistake. Not by refusing the deal, but by giving that plate of rice at all. Doubt devoured me. Was kindness only real until the world noticed? Was goodness nothing but currency for the powerful to twist? And then, when I was nearly broken, he returned. I found him waiting one quiet evening in the empty dining hall of the House of Hunger. The volunteers had gone home. The pots stood cold. He sat at the long table, his presence calm, his eyes carrying neither pity nor judgment, only gravity. Without a word, he slid a thick file across to me. Its leather cover was worn, its pages heavy. "Do you want to know why they target you?" he asked softly. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a ledger of names, philanthropists, activists, leaders, people I had admired, people the world adored. Each name was followed by contracts, dates, figures. Each one revealed the same truth. They had once been givers, dreamers, selfless souls. But when their moment came, they took the deal. They traded their kindness for power. "They were like you once," he said quietly. "But when tested, they chose wealth. They chose control. and now their kindness is nothing but a mask. Tears blurred the pages. Faces I had once whispered as inspiration were now laid bare as warnings. He closed the file with finality, his eyes piercing mine. "Now you must decide," he said. "Do you want to become one of them, or remain who you are?" The file lay heavy in my lap, its pages searing my hands with the truth they carried. My reflection in the glossy cover stared back at me, pale, uncertain, almost unrecognizable. The path before me split into two roads, one lined with gold, paved with power, filled with the applause of strangers, the other darker, lonelier, but true. His gaze held me steady, daring me to choose. And in that moment, I knew my decision would not only shape my future, it would decide whether my kindness lived or died. They couldn't destroy me with contracts, they couldn't bury me with headlines, and they couldn't break me with whispers. So instead, they came for the place where it had all begun, my street, my home, the four walls that had held both my hunger and my hope. And in one night of roaring flames and black smoke, the ground beneath my life was reduced to ash. It was close to midnight when the acrid smell of smoke seeped into my window. At first I dismissed it as factory fumes, but then came the sirens, urgent, piercing, followed by shouts and the crack of glass breaking. I rushed to the balcony, and the sight below tore the breath from me, flames clawing upward, swallowing windows, turning the night sky orange. My street, my home, was burning. I ran downstairs, choking on the smoke that thickened with every step. Neighbors poured into the street in their nightclothes, children crying, elders coughing into cloths. Fire trucks roared in, hoses spraying torrents, but the inferno refused to yield. I stood helpless as the fire gutted my apartment. I had little: worn furniture, a few books, scraps of clothes, a pantry where I had once clutched my last plate of rice. But as the flames devoured it all, I realized it wasn't just possessions that burned. It was every silent night I had endured, every whispered prayer I had dared to believe, every fragile hope of starting again. The fire chief shook his head when I begged for answers. "Arson," he muttered grimly. "No doubt. Someone wanted this gone. Proving it, that's harder." His words pierced deeper than the flames. They had not just tried to discredit me, they had come to erase me. By dawn, the fire was out, but the street was a graveyard of blackened ruins. Ash coated the ground like dust from a shattered world. I stepped into the wreckage, my shoes crunching on brittle remains. My fingers sifted through the debris, coming away black with soot, as though the ruins had marked me forever. Then a trembling voice cut through the silence. "Here." I turned to see my neighbor, her face streaked with tears and ash. In her hands, cradled like a holy relic, was the plate. My plate. The same chipped dish I had once placed in front of him, the plate that had carried my last rice. Darkened at the edges but intact, untouched by flames. The sight broke me. My knees buckled, and I clutched the plate to my chest, tears falling freely as ash smeared across my skin. Everything else was gone. But this remained. Somehow, impossibly, it had survived. The next morning, carrying the plate, I walked through the city like a ghost. My clothes reeked of smoke, my hair tangled, my skin streaked with soot. People stared, but said nothing. Some pitied, others judged, many simply turned away. Perhaps they had read the headlines and believed I deserved it. Perhaps they simply saw ruins walking on two legs. I found him waiting, as always, not impatient, but certain, as though he had known I would come. His eyes fell first on the plate in my hands, then rose to my face, reading every line of exhaustion, every trace of defeat. "I lost everything," I whispered, the words raw, stripped of pride. For the first time in years, I felt small, powerless, utterly undone. He did not rush to comfort me. He only placed his hand over mine, steadying the plate between us. His voice, when it came, was calm, unwavering, carrying the strength of someone who had seen centuries of destruction and renewal. "No," he said softly. "You've just begun." I blinked through tears, unable to understand. Then I followed his gaze. Behind him, rising from the ground where an empty lot had stood, was a new building. Fresh wood framed its walls. Windows glinted in the morning light, and across its entrance, bold letters gleamed. My name. I stood frozen, ash still clinging to my clothes, staring at the impossible vision before me. Where my world had been burned to the ground, another had been built, not just walls and windows, but a promise written in stone. My heart pounded as I gripped the plate tighter, torn between disbelief and the dawning realization that my story was not over. His words echoed in the silence. "You've just begun." And though fear still curled in my chest, I felt the first spark of something greater, something that both terrified and called me forward. When he led me down the spiral staircase, I thought I was walking into a cellar or another storage room, but as the torches lit one by one along the stone walls, the air shifted, and the space opened into a vast underground chamber. There, beneath the world's noise and indifference, sat hundreds of men and women whose faces carried scars of hunger, betrayal, and survival. They had once been invisible like me, but now they radiated the kind of power that silence could never erase. The chamber was unlike anything I had ever seen. Arched ceilings of rough stone towered above us, banners lined the walls, each stitched with symbols that seemed older than language. Long wooden benches stretched across the hall, filled with men and women of all ages. They didn't look like politicians or magnates. They looked like survivors who had learned to turn wounds into strength. As I stepped inside, every head turned. The silence was heavy, not hostile, but reverent, as though my footsteps echoed louder than they should. My satchel pressed against my side, the chipped plate inside reminding me of where this all began. He placed his hand on my shoulder and guided me forward. "This," he said, his voice carrying without effort, "is the one who gave not from plenty, but from emptiness. The one who chose kindness when her own hunger gnawed louder than the world." A murmur spread through the chamber. Recognition, not doubt. One by one, voices rose. An old man with a cane spoke first. "I was a beggar once. A stranger gave me a coin, and it became the seed of my trade." A young woman followed. "I was beaten, cast out. A woman gave me shelter for one night. That roof became the foundation for the homes I now run." Each story began with something small, a coin, a roof, a meal, and grew into something vast. My chest tightened as I realized I had unknowingly joined a chain centuries long. Then he told my story. His words were simple: a starving woman, a chipped plate, a man in rags, and a choice. Stripped of headlines, stripped of rumors, it was only the truth. When he finished, the chamber filled with applause. Hundreds of hands came together, the sound swelling like thunder. They weren't clapping for spectacle. They were clapping for recognition. For the first time, I felt my sacrifice was truly seen. From the second row, a woman leaned forward. "She gave when she had nothing," she said. "That is the kind we follow." Tears pricked my eyes. All my life, giving had made me weaker in the world's eyes. Here, it made me worthy. The applause faded, and he guided me toward a circular table at the far end. 12 chairs surrounded it, each carved with ancient symbols. 11 were filled. One stood empty. "Today," he announced, "the council has spoken. You have been elected to join us." My breath caught. Me? A woman who had once measured her life in scraps. Me, invited to sit among those who shaped futures? My hand trembled as I reached for the empty chair. But before I could sit, he raised his hand. Not yet. The chamber hushed instantly, his gaze locked on me. "One chair remains unfilled," he said, "but for her to claim it, One final test must be faced. A test no one can take, for her whispers rippled across the room. My heart pounded. I had been chosen, yet not accepted. Not fully. My heart pounded as I looked at the empty chair, its carved symbols gleaming faintly in the torchlight, beckoning and threatening all at once. The applause that had lifted me moments ago now seemed like distant thunder, fading beneath the storm of uncertainty building in my chest. I had been chosen, yet not fully accepted. His eyes locked on mine, steady, unblinking as he spoke again. One more test remains, for you. And in that moment, I knew that everything I had endured so far was only the beginning of a trial that could either crown me or break me beyond repair. When he told me we were returning to the same street where it had all begun, my body shivered with a mix of dread and reverence. That alley, once a place of hunger, fear, and silent choices, was now to become my trial. "The last test," he said simply, his tone carrying both gravity and hope. And in that moment, I realized this was not about him anymore. It was about me. The night air clung to my skin as we walked through the familiar streets. The cracked pavement, the dim yellow lamps, the faint smell of damp concrete. It was as if time had rewound to the night I had offered my last plate of rice. But this time, I was not the giver. I was to become the one in need. He stopped in the center of the street and handed me nothing but a thin, patched blanket. His gaze was steady, his words final. "For 1 week, you will live here with nothing. No name, no title, no memory of what you now carry. Only then will you understand what it means to lead." Then he left me in silence. The first night was merciless. I curled against a wall, the cold gnawing deeper than hunger. Footsteps passed, laughter drifted, but no one stopped. I was invisible again, just another shadow on a forgotten street. By the second day, the ache sharpened. People's gazes slid past me as if I were part of the pavement. Some wrinkled their noses, some pulled children closer, a few tossed coins without looking. My pride refused them, though my stomach growled louder than I could bear. On the third night, mockery found me. A group of young men jeered, tossing scraps at my feet, laughing at my tangled hair and cracked lips. I turned away, swallowing the sting of humiliation, but their cruelty cut deeper than the hunger. By the fourth day, exhaustion consumed me. My legs shook, my arms felt hollow, and my eyes blurred with weakness. Every sound around me, the chatter of vendors, the rush of traffic, seemed distant, as though the world had decided I no longer belonged to it. The fifth day nearly broke me. A woman passed with groceries, her perfume sharp against the homage stench of my own clothes. For a moment her eyes met mine. I thought she might stop. Instead, she clutched her bag tighter and hurried away. The rejection pierced worse than hunger. I realized then, I had once been her. I had once walked past, pretending not to notice. And now I sat in the place of those I had overlooked. But on the sixth day, everything shifted. A boy, no older than 10, approached hesitantly. His shoes were scuffed, his uniform frayed. From his bag, he pulled a small sandwich, clearly his own lunch. His hands trembled as he held it out to me. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My fingers shook as I accepted it, tears blurring my vision. I ate slowly, each bite more than food. It was recognition. He had seen me when the world refused to. That night I cried, not from hunger or shame, but from understanding. Kindness was never about abundance. It was about recognition. On the seventh day, the morning light painted the street gold. He returned, the same presence that had once filled the air with authority. His eyes searched mine, reading every moment of suffering, every lesson carved into me. I rose weakly, but my spirit was steady. He smiled faintly. "Now you understand," he said, extending his hand. "Let's feed the world." In that instant, the street where I had once given away my last plate of rice no longer felt like a place of endings. It felt like the birthplace of something immense. The hunger, the humiliation, the silence. It had all been the furnace in which a new purpose was forged. As his words echoed through me, I realized my story was no longer mine alone. And as I took his hand, trembling but resolute, I knew the true test was only beginning. From the ashes of destruction rose something no fire could ever consume. Where once there was rubble, despair, and smoke, now stood a kitchen that glowed like a lantern against the night. It was more than a place to eat. It was a sanctuary, a heartbeat, a promise carved into brick and firelight. No one who entered here would leave hungry again. The night of the opening felt like a miracle. Where weeks earlier the air had reeked of charred wood and smoke, now it shimmered with warmth and life. Lanterns swung across the doorway, golden light falling on cracked sidewalks and broken fences, transforming them into a path of hope. Above the entrance, bold letters proclaimed its name, the Kitchen of Light. I stood at the doorway in an apron already dusted with flour, my heart heavy and light all at once. The sign felt impossible. How could something so radiant stand where my ruins had been? And yet it was real, born from ashes, born from hunger, born from a single chipped plate. The doors opened before sundown, and already a line stretched down the block. Families clutching containers, mothers balancing children on their hips, elders leaning on canes, all stood waiting, patient but desperate. I remembered what it was to be among them, the shame of waiting, the weight of an empty pantry, the silent prayer that food might last one more day. Inside, the air buzzed with life. Pots of thick soup simmered, trays of rice steamed, loaves of bread cooled on racks. Volunteers moved in harmony, their hands steady, their smiles wide. Every clatter of ladles, every scrape of chairs, every burst of laughter from children created a symphony, unlike any I had ever heard. This was not chaos. It was worship. On the main wall stretched a mural, a hand offering a plate of rice to another. Beneath it, in bold strokes, the words, "Kindness never dies." Each time I glanced at it, my throat tightened. That was my story painted in color, my trembling hand immortalized in an act the world had tried to erase. The line grew longer as word spread. Some came for food, some came to serve, some came simply to be part of the light. An old man whispered that he hadn't eaten in company for years. A young mother cried as she tasted the soup, saying it reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen. Children scraped bowls clean, their cheeks glowing in the lantern light. Every story stitched itself into me. By midnight, the world outside had already begun to notice. A small documentary crew who had followed us quietly for weeks released their film that very night. They captured everything: the pots steaming, the mural glowing, the laughter of children, the trembling hands that received food with dignity. They captured me, apron stained, hair tied back, smiling despite exhaustion. By morning, the film had reached millions. The next day, the line outside doubled. People traveled from other neighborhoods, other towns, even cities. Some came with donations, some with letters of gratitude, others with sleeves rolled up ready to volunteer. The Kitchen of Light had become more than a place. It was a symbol. Yet with every cheer, every camera, every word of praise, a small unease stirred in me. Was I still the same woman who once gave without witness, without expectation? Or was I now becoming someone polished, celebrated, perhaps even consumed by recognition? The question shadowed me even as I pressed forward, ladle in hand. That evening, as lanterns flickered and laughter filled the hall, I carried bread to the tables when my heart jolted violently. There he was, not in the front, not demanding attention, simply standing in line. His posture was straight, his eyes sharp, But there was no arrogance, no entourage, no contracts, just a man waiting like everyone else. The same man who had once tried to chain my kindness in ink and paper. The clatter of spoons, the hum of voices, all of it dimmed until only his presence remained. He did not push forward. He did not speak. He simply waited, his eyes locked on mine, as if the entire night had been leading to this moment. The ladle trembled in my hand as the line moved closer, each step drawing him nearer. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the gravity of unfinished reckoning. Why had he come here, into the place, built from the ashes of what he once tried to destroy? Was he here to take, to confront, or to surrender? The answer stood just a few breaths away, and I knew nothing would be the same once he reached me. He did not arrive with guards or with fire in his eyes. He did not bring threats or contracts or schemes. He came quietly, alone, and when I placed a plate in his hands, his shoulders shook, not from power, not from hunger, but from something far greater. For the first time, the man who once tried to break me wept, and his silence said everything words never could. The kitchen of light glowed brighter than ever that night. Lanterns swung overhead, their light pouring like liquid gold across tables filled with steaming bowls. Children laughed freely, their voices rising above the clatter of spoons, and the air was rich with the fragrance of rice, bread, and roasted vegetables. To everyone else, it was another night of nourishment. To me, it was a night when fate circled back. I saw him standing in line, plain coat, weary eyes, no entourage. My heart pounded as though trying to break free. This was the man who had once stood against me, who had tried to turn compassion into currency. And yet here he was, waiting patiently, like any other hungry soul. When he reached me, I held out the plate, my hand trembling. His fingers brushed mine, cold, fragile, stripped of the arrogance that had once ruled boardrooms. He looked at the food, then at me, and for a moment I braced for performance, for poison wrapped in polite words. But he only lowered his gaze and began to eat. The first bite unraveled him. His jaw quivered, his shoulders shook. By the second, tears welled in his eyes. By the third, they spilled freely, carving lines down his face. I had seen this man wield power like a weapon, bend systems to his will. But I had never seen him cry. The crowd near us stilled. Some leaned closer, others exchanged uncertain glances. But I understood. This was no performance. It was surrender. His silence screamed louder than speeches, his tears heavier than apologies. When he finished half the plate, he set the spoon down and bowed his head. His voice, when it came, was hoarse, broken. "You were right." The words cut through me. The man who once tried to erase me now confessed defeat, not in rage, but in humility. For a long moment I couldn't speak. The weight of all the nights I had suffered because of him pressed down on me, yet so did the undeniable truth before me. Kindness had undone what power could not. Then, slowly, the impossible happened. A child at the nearest table began to clap. Then another. Then another. The sound spread like fire until the entire hall echoed with applause. They weren't clapping for me. They weren't clapping for him. They were clapping for the act itself, for the miracle of humility, for the proof that kindness could break stone. Tears fell harder down his face. And then, to my astonishment, he knelt. On the cracked tiles of the kitchen floor, among spilled broth and children's shoes, the man who once demanded the world bow to him bent before me. "I don't deserve this," he whispered, "but I want to learn." My knees trembled as I knelt beside him. My hand rested on his shoulder. My voice shook, but it carried the weight of everything we had endured. "Then start by standing with us, not above us." He nodded, rose slowly, and when he did, the hall erupted in cheers, not for wealth, not for power, but for redemption. I thought the night had given its final miracle, but there was one more. He approached again as the crowd thinned, his hands holding a rolled parchment. His eyes still glistened with tears as he pressed it into my palm. "This isn't for me," he said softly. "It's for you. For them. For everyone." I unrolled it slowly, the crowd pressing closer. At first, the letters blurred through my wet eyes. Then the truth came clear. Deeds of land. 10 properties across 10 countries, signed over to my name. My breath caught. My knees nearly gave. Land enough not just for one kitchen, but for many. A network of light that could stretch across the world. Around me, voices rose. "Build more. Take it further. The world needs this." And in that moment, I realized the silence had spoken louder than any contract, louder than any headline, louder than any fire. The parchment trembled in my hands as the crowd erupted in disbelief, in joy, in awe. He stepped back, head bowed, as though the act itself had set him free. Around me, voices cried out, "Build more! Take it further! The world needs this!" And in that moment, I realized the silence had spoken louder than any speech, louder than any contract, louder than any war cry. The world was watching now, and the next chapter had only just begun. This story began with just a single plate of rice, and it became a movement of hope. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change lives, then stay with us, share this journey, and keep spreading the light. Don't forget to subscribe, because the next chapter of this story belongs to all of us.